Hey, I'm Spencer with energeticcity.ca, and this is the Community Roundup, which is sponsored by Brad's Furniture and Appliances. And today I'm at Northern Lights College, joined by BC's Human Rights Commissioner, Kasari Govender.
Govender.
So close. I'll get there. But she's here to talk a little bit about a report that I believe the commission put together.
Yep.
Regarding hate incidents during the pandemic. So I know anecdotally we've heard that it's up. What did your report reveal about communities specifically here in Northeast BC in regards to hate incidents?
So hate incidents did rise across the province quite dramatically during COVID. I mean, hate is certainly nothing new. It's been around for a long time and is really embedded in longstanding patterns of power imbalances and discrimination. Right. But we did see this dramatic increase. And we saw it in every community pretty much. No one's immune from the increase. But what we had to work with is a fairly limited data set in the sense that we could measure what had been reported to police.
Right.
We know that many incidents are not reported to police. So the data, even with that limited data set, we could show that across the province, hate has increased 110%.
Wow.
Yeah, over this time. But what we know is that actually what's happened is probably much more significant even than that.
Right, because there's there's kind of attitudes towards maybe the people aren't comfortable putting the report in or other than that.
Yeah, exactly. And some people don't feel, I think, that police are safe for them to go to, that, some communities don't have as good a relationship with the police, right, or feel that, they're more likely to be victimized by police themselves and so don't feel comfortable. Some people said they didn't report to police because they just didn't think the police could do anything to help them.
Yeah.
So that, what they were looking for was that sense of accountability and they didn't feel would go anywhere. So there's a number of reasons that people don't report.
For sure. And I'm curious, how was the data collected for this report?
We did extensive evidence gathering. So we did a broad public survey across the whole province. We had about 2,600 people respond to that survey. We did a poll that was representative poll across the province. We held hearings. So we heard from over 100 individuals in person who did hearings before me and testified. We received written submissions, and we did extensive data requests to a whole bunch of public bodies, including extensively to all of the police forces in the province.
Wow, so quite an extensive evidence gathering.
Yeah.
While going through hearings and testimony and written submissions, is there something that's kind of stuck with you throughout this entire process? Just like maybe something that someone said, or just a pattern that you saw?
That's a great question. I mean, there's so much actually that has stuck with me. It was a year and a half of a quite intensive process. I mean, think of it as a mountain of evidence that we traversed over the course of this. But one of the first things that pops into my mind is the role of forgiveness and healing in this process.
Sorry.
Yeah.
There we go. Sorry, please continue.
The role of healing and forgiveness. And that we talked to some folks who call themselves formers, who are former members of groups that engaged in extremist ideological violence.
Oh, okay.
And so we talked to them about, what made you leave that community? What sort of made you change your values around hate? And one of the abiding themes there was empathy, like understanding what it is to be someone who's racialized, who experiences racism, or somebody who's Jewish who experiences anti-Semitism. And that really helped something click for people. It's really understanding the humanity of people around them.
Right. So really, humanizing these groups instead of us versus them, and that's what was kind of the turning point for those people. Yeah.
So it was certainly a real learning. I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I come from a more justice-oriented perspective, and there's lots of law reform and policy reforms that we've made recommendations for. But it was also a good reminder of the role of just understanding each other's humanity and being able to move past these issues.
Mm-hmm. And this may be out of the wheelhouse of the Human Rights Commission, but is that going to kind of drive some more programs where we do talk about the humanity of other groups and really just try to teach others about others.
Yeah, it certainly informed our recommendations in a significant way. So one of the recommendations is around restorative justice and using restorative justice approaches to hate, which hasn't always been used in crimes that involve a power imbalance, like hate, like gender-based violence. You have to be very careful how you use those tools, because not two equal parties coming to have a conversation about something. There was a real power imbalance, and you have to try to find ways to balance that out.
Right.
But we still do think restorative justice is one important avenue to be able to address hate in our community.
It's kind of like the difference between like maybe equity and equality.
Yeah, that we really need to understand that sometimes you need firm accountability. Accountability happens no matter what. So accountability meaning somebody has perpetuated hate and they need to be called out for that and understand the consequences of it. But in a more adjudicative system like criminal justice in courts or that kind of thing, someone's held accountable by being punished. Whereas in a restorative justice approach, someone is being held accountable by being held accountable to the community. So the community and the person or people who experience the harm are part of saying, this is what would heal. This is what could help us move past it. And I think there's a real mutual understanding and learning that happens in that process that can be really productive.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about hate, because I think that people have an idea of what maybe a hate incident is. I'm sure there's a spectrum. Can you kind of walk me through the spectrum of hate incidents?
Yeah, we worked to develop a definition of hate that we worked with for this inquiry, and it was quite broad. It was a bit broader than our legal definition. So I think what most people think of when they think of hate, and understandably so, is racism or hate based on religion. Those are really devastating forms of hate that have increased during this time. There's no question about it. But there's also hate on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation that have increased over this time. Hate based on gender, even in a larger sense, in the sense that gender-based violence be included within this definition of hate. We looked at hate on the basis of poverty or homelessness, which is not included in the legal definition of hate.
Okay.
We also looked at it from the perspective of the person or the people experiencing it, as opposed to the intentions of the person perpetrating it. So in law, you look at, what did this person intend? Did they intend to harm? This is an important consideration. We broadened that to include what was an experience of real harm by the person who was subjected to it. So we said, is somebody being targeted because of an aspect of their identity, like poverty or race or religion or gender and so on, or disability? If they are, have they experienced serious harm as a result? So that's kind of how we defined hate for this purpose.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm curious, is there any kind of theories as to why hate incidents really just, skyrocketed during this time?
I think it's a number of factors. For one thing, it's a little bit hard to separate out the political culture when COVID arrived. So we were in, we had the Trump era, we had the rise of the far right in leadership in countries around the world. So we found ourselves in that already fairly polarized political environment and seeing our leaders be much freer in how they expressed hate, unfortunately. It's a bit hard to separate that out because of the timing with COVID.
Right.
But there are a number of factors related to the pandemic itself, I think, that really speak to this increase in hate. So, for example, increased isolation. Canadians spent far more time online. I think everybody did around the world, but we know the stats here in Canada and here in BC that we saw a considerable increase of time spent online. Well, online spaces are unfortunately a hotbed of hate. Yeah. So people got exposed to a lot more conspiracy theories and disinformation and misinformation, and that grew hate. We also saw people under incredible amount of stress. So isolation, stress, economic stresses, social sense of not belonging, of being isolated in that social way. So all those factors really contributed, I think, to the rise of hate.
When it comes to that kind of polarization, especially, after we spent so much time kind of being chronically online, if you will, what is there kind of like a process that, can work to kind of depolarize people after that? Like, is there a way to kind of, now go back and try to get everybody back on the same page, if you will?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a magic bullet, but certainly some of our recommendations speak to what to do now. Some of them speak to what do we do now to prepare for the next emergency. So the next big societal crisis, whether that's as big as a global pandemic or more localized to the kind of climate crises that we're seeing where individual communities are facing a flood or a fire, they're facing evacuation. As a community they're in crisis, some of these same impacts can happen. So let's prevent that from happening in the first place. For example, we want to see in emergency planning that there is free or low cost, low barrier access to mental health supports for everybody. I think that would have been transformative in how we'd approach this pandemic if people could get that kind of mental health support whenever they needed it. So that's one of the recommendations of how we prepare for the next crisis. Improving our K-12 education system and ensuring that we're talking about hate and understanding anti-discrimination work and human rights work as just as essential to functioning in a well-functioning society as literacy and numeracy. And that acts both as a preventative but also to address the rise of hate, because we have children growing up during this time, right? We have young people, like little children whose most of their lives have been, or most of their memories anyway, have been during COVID. So now we can really start to unpack those conversations and ensure young people are able to freely talk about these issues and understand what their rights and their responsibilities are, and those around them as well.
So what are some ways to respond to hate when you see it?
You want to make sure that when you see hate, first of all, that you're safe. So take some steps to ensure that you're safe. If you are safe, wherever your safety is personally, that's how sort of measures how far you can go to be more than a bystander on hate. So, for example, it may be as simple as if you see somebody experiencing hate on a bus and you feel like it's not safe for you to speak up, you could perhaps go sit beside the person experiencing hate. So just providing that strength in numbers. Something as simple as that can be important, or something more significant of asking that person, can I help you? Can I connect you with some supports? Can I help you make this report to police? Do you want me to film this? For example, or speaking directly to someone perpetrating hate to say, that's not okay. It's not okay with me. I don't actually believe that people from this racial background or ethnic background are lesser than. Or why do you think that? Why do you think women and girls are less important or less valuable than men and boys, for example? And engaging in some of those conversations, again, really depending on what the incident is and your level of safety in it.
For sure, yeah, safety is 100%. I feel like a lot of people do feel guilty because they just don't know what to do in those situations.
Yeah.
But I don't think that guilt is really warranted. If you're in a lonely street or whatever in the evening, for example, maybe don't if you're not feeling safe.
Yeah, exactly. And either you seek your own help, or again, standing by someone, or sitting by them on the bus, or making eye contact to indicate that you stand with them in some ways. Even something as simple as that can be helpful in those circumstances.
Are there ways that residents in Fort St. John can be more vigilant when it comes to incidents of hate?
I think being able to spot it and identify it, it's certainly one of the recommendations in the report. The first recommendation actually is for all of us in the province to really ensure that we understand hate, that we understand what's happening. Read the executive summary and maybe even the plain language summary on our website. So we've summarized, it's a giant report, it's almost 500 pages. So
wow, yep.
Most people will not read the whole report and totally understand that. But there is a summary that's meant to be much more accessible online. So that's a great place to start. Read through that summary and begin to understand what is it we're talking about when we're talking about hate? How prevalent is it around me? Because I think that would open a lot of people's eyes. The numbers were pretty staggering, even for me, going into this work, choosing this topic, because I knew it was a real issue. And even I was really shocked by some of the numbers that we found and some of the high prevalence. So understanding that, and then beginning to turn to that sense of being proactive as opposed to feeling hopeless in the face of hate, hence the name of the report, From Hate to Hope.
Mm-hmm. We talked mostly kind of if we experience hate, when we're out in the community. What about online spaces? Were there any recommendations in the report when it comes to hate that's online that we all know, especially after the pandemic, is heightened?
Absolutely. So my jurisdiction is as BC's Human Rights Commissioner. I'm appointed under BC law, so I don't have the ability to make recommendations directly to the federal government under the law. But the reason that's significant in this case is because regulating online space, to some extent at least, is within the federal government's job rather than the province's job. So what we've done is made recommendations directly to social media companies. We asked for extensive data from 7 social media companies, including Reddit and Meta and so on. We got varying levels of responses to those requests, but we also did extensive research. So we commissioned expert evidence on online spaces, on online hate and what to do about it. And so based on all of that, made recommendations directly to social media companies to ask them basically to change some of their algorithmic approaches to how they run their business model, so that they're not profiting off the advertising associated, for example, with hate, so that they don't drive viewers towards hateful content, but in fact drive viewers away. So those are some of the ways. There's some fairly detailed recommendations. I'm hoping both that social media companies themselves adopt these recommendations, but also that the federal government, as it's looking to regulate in this space, which I understand it is, looks to these recommendations to know what it is that they could do in this space.
What's the response kind of been like? Have you gotten any response from these companies, such as Facebook, Meta, or Reddit, or what have you?
We've had varying levels of responses. So we've just done a follow-up round to the social media companies, asking for around their implementation plans for this recommendation, this series of recommendations. So far, we've only heard back from one. We'll be increasing that correspondence over the coming months. Mm-hmm. Most of our recommendations are aimed at the provincial government, and then we have some one to the police. So we are currently reaching out to all police forces in the province, as well as the ministries that our recommendations are directed to, and have heard very positive messages from the provincial government. So hopeful that we'll see some progress there. And just beginning those conversations with police forces about when they're going to create more dedicated roles around responding to hate crimes within every police department, and improve training and standardized training, for example, across all of those.
So this work continues, it's ongoing.
Absolutely. We are absolutely committed to no dusty reports on the shelf, that we're really committed to making sure that these recommendations are implemented across all the recommendations. So again, to all those different duty bearers, and we will continue to put that pressure on, and I will continue to be transparent about what we hear back as we hear.
Excellent. Anything else you want to add before I let you go today?
No, just thank you very much for drawing attention to this issue. This is part of the solution, actually, is ensuring that we have these conversations in local communities, which is why I'm here. And I so appreciate local media wanting to engage in the conversation, because this is how we get the word out. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. The event is going on today at 1. It's a private event. Really looking forward to hearing what conversations transpire there, and hopefully we have the opportunity to chat again.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. This has been the Community Roundup, which is sponsored by Brad's Furniture and Appliances. I'm Spencer with energeticcity.ca. Thank you so much for watching.